We are live. Here we are. This is See Through. It is a podcast with me, Achita Gopi, as your host. And I am so grateful to be with all of you. So grateful to be here for yet another adventure with our supreme and divine, dearmost best friend, the person who really loves us the most, looks out for us the most, comforts us the most, is there for us the most when we need it, even though our minds will try to tell us differently. And that is why we come together for See Through. We come together to try and get some clarity, to try and become transparent ourselves, and then to try and get some clarity through spiritual texts and literatures. In this case, we have been reading through Krishna book, which is a summary of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavat Purana, which is a very old and sacred literature from India. But we have been bringing it into our daily lives wherever we are. So some of us are in America, some of us are on the East Coast, some of us might be on the West Coast, some of us are in Brazil, some of us are in so many different places. We've had places and people tuning in from all over the world, and we get to bring this spiritual literature into our lives, wherever that might be. So welcome. I'm seeing lots of our regulars. Ashi, thank you for being here. We've got some new people. If this is your first time, thank you so much for joining. It's going to be an adventure, as it always is. But first, we are going to invoke some auspiciousness into this space. We are going to allow ourselves to take a nice, deep, cleansing breath, understanding that, as our Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, he is the origin of the ingoing and the outgoing breath. Can we breathe with that feeling of being filled and caressed by our loving Supreme Person? Can we take a nice deep breath just to center ourselves, ground ourselves, get ourselves to be here in this moment? And for the next hour, cast away those worries and anxieties and fears that might try to creep up in from the outside world. But for right now, we are in a sacred space with each other. Om Ajnanatirmirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Vancha kalpatarubhyasya kripa sindubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Now we're ready. I feel definitely a little more put together. Not so frazzled and all over the place. My mind feels definitely a lot more centered and ready for this exploration of adventures and spiritual events, and I hope that you all are also ready. We have been journeying through Krishna book. We are entering in chapter 19, Devouring the Forest Fire. We had a chapter just like this a few chapters ago. Krishna subdued the ego of a serpent named Kalia. And then directly after that, he has to subdue a forest fire to save all of the people that he loves. And now it's devouring the forest fire. Again? Really? Again? Yep, again. Do we ever have those hurdles that we think we have overcome? We've done the praying, we've done all the things, and then a couple months later, a few chapters later, it seems as though the same problem comes up again, and we are thinking, again, I thought I already went through this. Can I not get away from it? Really? And I think that it's important to understand that when those things happen, not if, when, because they will happen, even to people in God's life, it's not a punishment. It is natural. God is not punishing us. Sometimes we get the same problem because we get to look at it from a different perspective. We have grown. We have overcome a lot. So when that problem comes up again, you get to look at it with fresh eyes, as a new person, with renewed faith, with new energy, with new blessings, with new mercy. How are we choosing to look at it now? Can we look at it from a new perspective? Or do we get stuck into the old habits? Do we get dragged back into thinking, oh, I haven't changed, I'm just the same as I've always been? No. And I homeschool a child. And as a parent who is homeschooling a child, each grade kind of starts off with teaching the same things that they learned the last grade. But the kid has a new perspective now. The child is grown. Their ways of understanding that concept are new. It is the same with us in these blessings, these lessons, these obstacles. Our ways of understanding them are new. And so we don't have to get so down on ourselves if we are seeing those same lessons repeat a little bit. Now the challenge is, how are we looking at it? Is it different? Are we different? Are the blessings different this time? So I really like this chapter because it is the second time we are seeing a forest fire incident. And so without further ado, we're going to get started. We left off in a beautiful forest known as Bandirvan. Bandirvan is a very special place. It is a forest of bandira trees or banyan trees. Banyan trees are very peculiar. Their roots grow so long that their branches grow so long that they start to interconnect with the roots. And it creates almost like an interlocking cave, right? You get like a jungle gym almost. And so the boys that lived in this village of Vrindavan with Krishna as a child, they would play almost as a jungle gym in these banyan trees in Bandirvan. They would snake in between all of the branches and roots because they grow very, very strong. They would swing from them. And having gone to Bandirvan, I looked and I said I could see how boys would be swinging from the vines of these trees, having like the best time, really living their best life, carefree. And this is where we are, where the parrots are chirping charmingly, sometimes speaking the pastimes of Krishna. where there are so many birds and peacocks are soaring, calling out to one another in the trees, where all of these trees are loaded with fruits, and all of them are just hoping for a chance to serve the divine prince of this spiritual playground, where Krishna and all of his friends go about their day smiling, laughing, joking, playing. And this is the divine abode. It is a place of play for the soul. It is not a place of burden anymore. The burdens are here. We get to let go of them. That spiritual abode is a place of wonder, adventure, excitement, play, and above all, love. So much love. Overflowing, like the great Jamuna river that flows through Vrindavan. Overflowing with divine love and divine shelter. And so this is where we have left off in Bandirvan. Balaram, the brother of Krishna, had just killed a demon named Pralamba. And so now we are trying to figure out what all of them will do next. So this is chapter 19, Devouring the Forest Fire. While Krishna and Balaram, the two divine brothers, and their friends were engaged in the pastimes described above, the cows, being unobserved, began to wander off on their own, entering farther and farther into the deepest part of the forest, allured by fresh grasses. The goats, cows, and buffalo traveled from one forest to another and entered the forest known as Ishikatavi. Even though, if you have a different version that was done in later years, you'll get a different name of the forest. This forest was full of green grass, and therefore they were allured. But when they entered, they saw that there was a forest fire, and they began to cry. On the other side, Balaram and Krishna, along with their friends, could not find their animals, and they became very aggrieved. They began to trace the cows by following their footprints, as well as the path of eaten grass. All of the boys were fearing that their very means of livelihood, the cows, were now lost. Soon, however, they heard the crying of their cows. Krishna began to call the cows by their respective names with great noise. Upon hearing Krishna calling, the cows immediately replied with joy. But by this time, the forest fire surrounded all of them, and the situation appeared to be very fearful. And this is a blessing for all of us. Can we imagine when we are feeling the most lost? Can we have faith that God will call our names personally? Do we have faith that God knows us? That God understands and sees our struggle? And that God will call our name personally because our friend knows who we are. Our friend knows us intimately. God is not a stranger. God is not someone somewhere just too busy to care about us. The most wonderful thing about the path of bhakti is that it stresses so much that God is living within the heart of every living entity. And as such, that God has no job other than to have a relationship with us. Personally, our God, our friend, will call out to us when we're in trouble. Oh, my friend, come back to me. That is a call that we are all looking for. I know I'm looking for it. I am always looking for my supreme friend to call out to me. Oh, Achyuta, come back now. You've wandered too far. Sometimes I am telling God, I have wandered too far. I sometimes don't know how I can make my way back. I have gone too far out. And I wrote a little section or a poem about it called Separation Anxiety. Oh Govinda, there are times when I realize just how far away from you I've wandered. When I look back at just how far I've gone, my body starts to shiver. My heart quickens, my limbs ache. My head begins to pound. My entire world starts spinning too fast for me to catch up with. How did I ever get so far away from you? And how will I ever get back? The panic sets in. I have separation anxiety from being apart from you, Lord. But just when I fear that hope is lost, you come riding in on the waves of your holy name, reminding me that no matter how far I think I may have wandered, you have always kept a very close eye on my heart. When will I bring joy to both our hearts and finally turn my face toward you? Oh Govinda, I am yours. I am yours. Oh Lord, I am yours. Oh my friend, I am yours. Do we have the courage to tell the Lord, our friend, I am yours, and realize I've wandered far away, but at any moment you can call me back and I'll come running? Do we have the courage to come running? Or are we looking around saying, this forest fire around me is too big, Lord. I hear you calling, but I can't even see 2 feet in front of me because of all the smoke. What happens when we feel as though we hear the call of the Lord, but we cannot make it there? Let's see what happens for the cows. The cows feel as though they can't make it there. What do they do? What does Krishna do? The flames increased as the wind blew very quickly, and it appeared that everything movable and immovable would be devoured. All the cows and the boys became very frightened, and they looked toward Balaram, the way a dying man looks at the picture of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Woo! Man, that is some poetry from Srila Prabhupada. They looked toward Balaram, the source of all strength, spiritual, material, emotional, the way a dying man looks at the picture of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the way a dying soul looks at redemption. Amazing. They said, Dear Krishna and Balaram, we are now burning from the heat of this blazing fire. Let us take shelter of your lotus feet. We know you can protect us from this great danger. Our dear friend Krishna, we are your intimate friends. It is not right that we should suffer in this way. We are all completely dependent on you, and you are the knower of all religious life. We do not know anyone except you. This is a prayer for all of us. All of us, every single one of us, we know how this feels, where there's a heat of a blazing fire, either emotionally, materially, physically. We know what that feels like for all of us, and it might be different for all of us, right? The obstacle is going to be different for us all, but we know what those flames feel like. So let us take this prayer into our hearts. Let us really close our eyes and feel it. Dear Krishna and Balaram, dear Lord, we are now burning from the heat of this blazing fire. Let us take shelter of your lotus feet. We know you can protect us from this danger. They didn't say we believe. They didn't say we think. We know. Certainty. Absolute certainty. Like, I know the color of my hair. I know I have seen the color of my skin. Then I know that you can protect us from this danger. Why? We've seen miracles before, friends. We like to think we haven't, right? Our minds like to tell us we haven't, but we absolutely have seen miracles before. Every breath taken, every day given. We've seen miracles, so we know you can protect us from this great danger. My Lord, my friend, you've been protecting me every day from things I don't even know about. You've protected me when I've prayed, and you've protected me when I have forgotten to pray. You've still been giving your protection no matter what. So we know you can protect us from this great danger. Our dear friend Krishna, my Lord who is all attractive. We are your intimate friends. It is not right that we should suffer in this way. Right? We are suffering so many obstacles. It's not right, Lord. We are all completely dependent on you. I give up the ego that tells me that I am independent and that I can do it all myself. I give up that ego right here, right now in front of you, Lord. And you are the knower of all religious life. We do not know anyone except you. So let's see what a prayer like this does to the heart of the Supreme Person. The personality of God had heard the appealing voices of his friends, and casting a pleasing glance over them, he began to answer. By speaking through his eyes, he impressed his friends that there was no cause for fear. Can we look into the eyes of God, the eyes of our spiritual masters, our spiritual teachers, our gurus, and understand and realize that there is no cause for fear? There is mercy, blessings, miracles. There's no cause for fear. Then Krishna, the supreme mystic, the powerful personality of Godhead, immediately swallowed up all the flames of the fire. That's heroic, adventurous, and poetic. Many commentators say that Krishna was hungry, and this forest fire satisfied his hunger. What is God hungry for? God says, give me your obstacles. Give me your anxieties. Give me your worries. I will swallow them all down until they cease to exist. God asks, give it all to me. Let me shoulder the burden for you. Why? Because that's love. That is love. We are in a relationship with God where what can we really offer the Supreme Person? That Supreme Person is so eager to be there for the people who need him. Oftentimes when we look for relationships, we look for the people that, like, oh, you're a person that I will need and I'll depend on. What can you add to my life? And here, we are people that desperately need the Supreme Person. And the Supreme Person is so happy to be in that kind of relationship. How incredible is that? How incredible. And so sometimes I like to pray, oh Lord, oh my friend, you've been saving the world all day. When you get weary of saving the world, if you ever get weary of hearing countless prayers, then maybe you can just come and sit a while with me. And maybe I'll have the courage not to ask anything of you, but simply to be with you. In your presence, soaking up all of that love. It just emanates from the Supreme Person. It's not like he has to do anything it's not an expenditure for him, right? He's not depleted by giving so much love. It simply is. He exudes it. He is the source of an unending well of love and compassion. So maybe one day I'll have the courage to say, oh, my friend, just come rest a while with me. The cows and boys were thus saved from imminent danger. Out of fear, the boys were almost unconscious. But when they regained their consciousness and opened their eyes, they saw that they were again in the forest with Krishna, Balaram, and the cows. They were astonished to see that they were completely free from the attack of the blazing fire and that the cows were saved. They secretly thought that Krishna must not be an ordinary boy, but some demigod. In the evening, Krishna and Balaram, along with the boys and cows, returned to Vrindavan, playing their flutes. As they approached the village, all the gopis became very joyous. Throughout the day, the gopis used to think of Krishna while he was in the forest, and in his absence, they were considering one moment to be like 12 years. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the 19th chapter of Krishna, Devouring the Forest Fire. Now, fear not, we're not done, because we've still got some time left, and I happen to have written a book called Premamala. And within that book is this same pastime, because it is a favorite of mine. Really love this pastime. Love it, love it. And so I thought, let me read a little bit from that. It is in a section of the book called Believe, Lessons from the Forest Fire. And so we pick up where Balaram has just killed Pralamba. And all of the boys are like astonished to have him back. So let's see what happens. And we'll also get into lots of lessons, because we are getting so many awesomely cool comments in the sections on YouTube. We are getting passages from the Bible, which I absolutely love. Come unto me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Which one of us can say, I'm not heavily burdened, it's fine. We like to pretend, but that's not really what's happening. We are heavily burdened. And here is a Supreme Person who is ready, willing, able to carry those burdens. They say that Anantadev, the Supreme Serpent, carries all of the universes on just one hood as though they were a mustard seed. That is a hero. That's the kind of hero I need in my life. I need somebody who's like, it's like your problems are nothing. I'm carrying universes as though they were a mustard seed. A mustard seed is so small that you barely even notice one. You'll notice a lot of them if you spill them, but just one, you don't even notice it. It's like nothing. And that's how God can carry us and our burdens as though they are nothing. Doesn't mean that God feels that they are nothing. Actually, what's amazing is God's capacity to really identify and feel with us. It's very great. But we don't have to worry about overburdening God with our problems. That will never happen. So let's see what happens with all of the boys within Premamala, which is my retelling of this beautiful story. Hey, give that back! Madhumangal, which is one of Krishna's friends, watched forlorn as his cloth pack with his precious lunch goodies sailed over his head. He raced backward as quickly as his feet would carry his heavy frame, his eyes constantly following his treasure as it dropped from the sky. He reached his arms back until he was sure that he would catch his lunch, but it dropped into the hands of another boy who snatched up the pack and held it close to his chest, turning away from Madhumangal and running to the other side of the bright green pasture. Madhumangal's shouts carried throughout the forest of Bandirvan, where the cowherd boys played and tended their cows. Madhumangal's outraged cries drowned out the sounds of the many birds of Vrindavan, but louder still was the laughter of the boys, who taunted him, making the chubby Brahmin boy more and more angry. Madhumangal caught up with one boy, who held the stolen lunch out, dangling the large parcel filled with delicious-smelling preparations in front of him. Madhu snatched his lunch from the boy and tucked it under his arm securely. "You boys have no culture. You are ruffians, all of you. I am a Brahmin. Don't you have any respect for the higher ranks of society? The twice-born priests should be cared for and respected by all." Madhu's chest swelled as he scolded the boys for their rough and careless behavior. The small boy was shaking and sputtering with indignation. But Balaram, who looked like a majestic white elephant, with his deep blue dhoti swaying in the breeze, calmly walked over to Madhumangal, draping one of his long arms around the boy's shoulder. "Madhu, Brahmins should be charitable and open with their wealth for the good of society. A generous, knowledgeable, young priest like yourself wouldn't want to hoard anything from us, your dearest friends, would you?" Balaram walked with Madhumangal away from the group of boys who were eyeing him with glances laced with ill intent. Madhu thought for only a moment before he answered. "Balaram, I have no desire to share my lunch with you or anyone else at this time. It is my lunch, and I will be the one to decide when to open it." Madhumangal is a boy who is always very classically hungry. It seems to be like a character trait of his. Like he's not so tall, little chubby, always hungry at all times. Balaram raised an eyebrow and drew Madhumangal close to him, whispering confidentially in the younger boy's ear. "These boys are becoming agitated by their hunger. It seems like they are ready to take your lunch from you by force. Better that you offer them some and pacify their minds. Otherwise, I cannot say what will happen." Balaram's eyes were wide, and his graceful shoulders rose in a shrug as he spoke his sage advice. Madhumangal merely huffed and crossed his arms sternly in front of him. Clearly had no intention of sharing his precious snacks. With a glance, Balaram gave a signal to the other boys, who surrounded Madhu, quick as lightning, and stealthy like wolves cornering a lamb. One boy snatched the lunch pack that Madhu had tucked away. Madhu shouted in outrage, but caged in as he was by the barricade of cowherd boys, he was powerless to catch the boy who had taken his lunch. One boy pulled on the back fold of Madhu's dhoti, while another pulled on the front fold. They pulled his turban from his head, grabbed his thin cotton scarf from around his shoulders, and untied the sash around his waist. Madhu tried to run after the boys, but tripped repeatedly over his open dhoti, held together only by the knot tied tightly around his waist, the rest of the cloth scattering across the pasturing grounds of the forest. Balaram's shoulders shook as he laughed heartily at his greedy friend. Madhumangal tried in vain to right his disheveled clothing, until finally, his face growing red, lips quivering, and his eyes growing moist with tears of frustration, Madhumangal had to stop and try to recover from chasing his lunch. "Rascals! Scoundrels! There will be dire consequences to pay for this kind of treatment." Madhu shook his fist in the air with all of his self-righteous might, and he bit down on his lip to stop his tears from flowing as his rotund belly heaved, and he struggled to catch his breath. "You will all pay dearly for this, I promise you." Madhu's entire body shook with anger, until finally Krishna came to console his Brahmin friend. Krishna placed his arms around Madhu's shoulders and sought to calm him. There was no use in trying to retrieve the lunch pack. It was lost. The other boys on the outskirts of the pasture howled and whooped like monkeys, their cheeks filled with stolen goods. Govinda bit back a smile as he helped his friend redress. Once Madhu was looking a little bit back to normal, Krishna stood back to survey his handiwork. Krishna gave Madhu's turban one last adjustment, tilting it humorously, before placing his arm around Madhu's shoulders once more. Krishna pacified the other boy with soothing words as he walked with him to the opposite side of the pasturing grounds. I yearn to be such close friends with Krishna like this, where my friend will come and console me. Oh, friend, don't worry about what they've done. It's okay. Come, walk with me. Be consoled. It was summer in Vrindavan, as it is now, but felt as perfect as a spring day in Bandirvan. The huge Bandira trees with their far-reaching branches and hanging plentiful leaves offered ample shade from the hot sun, but the boys had just enough wonderful golden sunlight to play in before they would eat their lunch together and settle down for an afternoon nap. Vines and tree limbs hung down like a true jungle gym for the cowherd boys, and they climbed onto the different branches and swung to and fro, calling out to one another as they soared through the air. A few cowherd boys were up in the trees. They sat, completely still, perched on the wide branches, imitating the birds who eyed them warily and were also motionless. Others surveyed the area from their high vantage point and took stock of the surrounding lakes and caves, which could be wonderful hiding spots and pastime places later. Some boys made loud calling noises to like the monkeys, who chattered to one another just as the boys did below. It was almost difficult to see who was copying whom, monkey or boy. Many gopas surrounded Sri Balaram, talking excitedly with him, looking like dozens of bees humming and buzzing around a brilliant white lotus. The blue of Balaram's silken garments was like the azure clouds that filled the sky, and his face was like the effulgent full moon. Earlier that day, Balaram killed a vicious demon named Pralamba, who had disguised himself as one of their friends. Balaram was being carried away on the boy's shoulders when the innocent-looking boy began to change in size, and Balaram discovered that the Gopa, or cowherd boy, was no ordinary boy at all, but an evil demon with horrible intentions. The boys cried out again and again, wondering what would happen to the strongest and most fearless of their group. But with one punch that surrounded throughout the forests like thunder and made the peacocks call to one another, Balaram killed the demon, who crashed to the ground, looking like a crumbled mountain, and died immediately. After the harrowing experience earlier in the day, large groups of boys were completely fixated on Balaram. It was as though they refused to leave his side, just in case anything else happened to their friend, who was more dear to them than their own lives. They watched him as though he had just come back from the dead. Many of the boys were still clapping and dancing, hopping energetically from one foot to another, and describing Balaram's strength and prowess. They swarmed around him, touching him, leaning on him, massaging his shoulders, using any excuse they could to make sure that he was really, truly fine. Balaram smiled at them all, his glance cooling like a great river of affection as he accepted their love and attention. On the other side of the pasture, Krishna finally calmed Madhumangal, who after the effects of the boys' pranks that day looked like an angry cobra, who had just been stepped on. His arms were crossed, and his breaths came out in great agitated huffs. Peacocks ventured closer at intervals, eager to see the fun that the boys were having, and the deer, with their beautiful, shiny coats of bronze fur, watched shyly from behind the trees. "Gopal!" One cowherd boy shouted for Krishna, and the panic in his voice was enough to halt every boy present in the midst of their revelry. Each face turned, and they all saw Subala running towards their group, wringing his hands in anxiety, his eyes darting around him. "The cows! They're gone!" he shouted as he neared them. Suddenly, Subal made an extremely valid point. As they all looked around, they realized that they hadn't actually heard the cows and their lowing for some time. Caught up in their excitement and play, the cows must have wandered off, and the cowherd boys hadn't even noticed. As though a huge cloud descended over them, the mood of the group of boys changed immediately. Their eyes grew fearful, and they all looked around one another as though perhaps Subal could have been mistaken and maybe their herd was just around the bend of one huge banyan tree. "You're right. They're gone." Bhadrasena's usually fearless eyes grew wide and round with concern. Bhadrasena was a leader of all the boys, but if he was concerned and in anxiety, the boys understood that they all had to consider the very real possibility that their cows might be gone. "We were so distracted that we didn't even notice them wander off." Madhumangal looked at all the boys anxiously, and then hung his head a little in shame. "What will our parents say? They entrusted us with the responsibility of looking after the cows, and now we've lost our livelihood. How will we go back to Vrindavan and face everyone there?" A smaller boy clutched at his chest, which was rapidly rising and falling with each shaky breath he took. His eyes watered and his lips began to tremble. All of the boys immediately began to regret their carefree attitude. Some boys leaned on each other, while others openly began to cry. Krishna looked at Subal, who had not given up hope yet, and was looking all around their large circle for any sign of their precious cows. "Look!" Subal jumped and pointed down at the ground before him. The group of cowherd boys rushed to the spot, some crouching, others climbing on taller boys to get a good view. "Here are hoof prints, and look, they lead this way. Hopefully, we can follow them and find out where our cows might have gone. We might be able to get them back." The boys began to talk and move as if with one mind. They immediately began following the trail of hoofprints like little ants, marching one by one, following their scout leader, with Subal and Krishna in the front of their pack. "And look here, where the grass has been chewed. Our herd definitely must have come this way." Madhumangal nodded sagely as he pointed out signs to his band of friends. The boys stayed close together, some of them holding on to each other's sashes at their waists, as they walked constantly, looking downward with laser focus on the impressions of the cows' hooves on the forest path. The boys walked farther and farther away from their original pasturing grounds. Some of the boys looked around them anxiously as they realized that they were leaving Bandirvan. The cows had wandered so far away that they clearly found their way into some other forest. "I wonder if we will find them at all. We should have paid closer attention to them." One small boy shook his head, and his shoulders drooped under the weight of his fear and regret. How many times is this us? We feel the weight of fear and regret. How do we get out of it? And more importantly, what in the world must God think of us? Oof. Like, God must be thinking, you all are just a handful. How am I supposed to save you? Well, let's see what Krishna thinks of this situation. As all of the boys start to feel the weight of fear and regret. "Don't worry. You'll certainly find the cows. Krishna's sweet voice was steady and sure. All the boys looked to their Gopal. They had complete and total faith in him. If he said they would find the cows, then there was no doubt left within their minds that they would. And this is our friend. Our friend has no doubt that we will come out the other side of these obstacles. Our friend says, don't worry. The regret, the shame, the guilt, the fear, that has no place for you. Not for you. We walk in this shadow of mercy. We walk under the shade, under the umbrella of God's blessings. We travel already protected. Our lives, our existence, they're already protected. The cowherd boys loved him with such simple-hearted faith that Krishna was all they knew. They awoke in the morning, and their first thought was to go to Krishna's house, even before they ate or took care of themselves. Separating themselves from Krishna at the end of one day, even knowing that they would see him the next, was painful for them. Krishna had saved them from so many demons. They knew deep within themselves that he would help them with this calamity as well. With that renewed vigor, hanging on to their faith in Krishna and his words, the cowherd boys marched on, intently looking for their cows who were just like their family members. Each boy was thinking about the huge number of cows that they had been given into their charge, and they were each wondering how they could have become so preoccupied, so inattentive, that they hadn't even noticed when their cows wandered so far off. The boys walked all the way to the forest of Manjuyavati, quite a far walk from Bandirvan. As they reached the outer border of the forest, they could hear the sounds of their herd. They perked up, their faces showing their immediate relief. Some of the boys sighed deeply, pressing their hands over their quickly beating hearts. The cows were calling out and lowing in the fields, the bells hanging from their neck tinkling and clanging in the distance. They could hear the sound of many hooves tapping against the earth as the cows grazed, lured away from their owners by the scent of sweeter grasses. As the boys laid eyes on their herd, their relief was short-lived. The cows were looking in all directions for guidance. Just behind the cows was a huge forest fire. The boys gasped collectively and looked at each other, wondering what in the world they should do next. The cows were shaking in fear and crying out loudly as they felt the heat of the huge blaze behind them. Their large, usually kind and peaceful eyes were darting in all directions, trying to find some refuge from the heat of the fire, but there was none in sight. The boys looked to Krishna, who immediately put his hand up close to his mouth to amplify his voice, and in a calm, strong, lilting, musical voice, he called out to each cow, "Harini!" As Krishna called to his favorite cow, she raised her head, her ears perking up immediately, and she opened her mouth to call back to him with a deep sound full of longing. She took halting, fearful steps toward Krishna, and Krishna, along with the boys, inched closer to her and the other cows in the herd. He called again, "Hamsi!" As soon as Krishna called, instantly Hamsi called back to him. The other cows began to realize that their Krishna was there. Huddled together, the cows began to move toward Krishna and the other boys. Krishna called each cow by their name, and the cows called back as they moved closer to the safety of Krishna. The glow of the fire was so bright that some of the boys shielded their eyes from the intensity of the flames. "Oh no, look!" Subal's shriek grabbed the boys' full attention, and they began to look around them. The fire that had been just behind the cows was now surrounding them all. Everywhere they looked, in every direction, there were scorching, high-leaping flames, and they were quickly growing hotter, higher, and closer. The flames Heat and smoke were carried on the wind so quickly and so wildly that the fire looked as though it were pulled by a great flaming chariot, charging forward, closing in on the group of boys and cows. The boys could swear they saw a being in the flames, malevolent and fearsome, its mouth gaping at them grotesquely. All of the boys began shouting and yelling, huddling closer to one another to try and find some shelter as they tried to think of some way out of this dire situation. They could hardly see one another, let alone think clearly. It was obvious that there was no way out of the great fire. Once they saw that they were completely captured, they all turned to Krishna, desperate and afraid. "Krishna, Krishna!" they called over and over again at the top of their lungs, sucking in as much breath as the smoke would allow and trying to make themselves heard over the sound of the raging fire. "Krishna, you have to help us. Only you can help us, and we are your friends." Subal grabbed Krishna's arm and leaned closer to his soothing presence and as far away from the fire as he could get. Beads of perspiration gathered on their arms and faces and made trails down their necks and backs, and it seemed as though the flames only got hotter and hotter by the moment. "We are your own family and friends. We are yours completely. You have to help us. You wouldn't let this fire devour us. You can't let this fire devour us." Bhadrasena shouted over the tremendous roar of the fire, cows, and boys, who all seemed to be competing with each other for Krishna's attention. Krishna looked around them, looking as calm as if they were standing in their favorite forest instead of in the midst of danger. Krishna didn't seem worried at all. He considered for a moment before he answered. "All right, don't worry. Everything will be fine. I'll protect you. Just close your eyes." Krishna looked at each boy with a small, reassuring smile. "Are you joking? Krishna, this is crazy talk. How can we be saved from this forest fire simply by closing our eyes? What kind of plan is this?" Madhumangal, totally overcome with fear, shouted at his friend who was more dear to him than his own life, or his favorite lunch. Before Krishna could answer, Sridhama stuck up for him. "We all know that Krishna has amazing magical, mystical powers. We see him do unexplainable things every day. Some powers must be kept secret. That must be why he wants us to close our eyes. It must be some sort of secret ritual that Krishna has to perform. Some of those secret rituals must be done alone, but since we can't leave Krishna or this fire, if we close our eyes, then Krishna will be alone in a way. But what does it matter? Let's just do whatever Krishna says before this fire gets any closer to us. Everyone, close your eyes." Sridhama followed his own order and quickly shut his eyes tight. Every single one of the boys followed until only Krishna and Balaram were left looking at one another. With a knowing smile, Balaram calmly closed his eyes. The glow of the fire reflected off of both Krishna and Balaram, tinging them with a beautiful reddish effulgence, turning their beautiful forms even more enchanting, as though they were decorated for a festival. The wind whipped around the group of boys, the same wild, furious wind that had carried the fire, almost as if it were a person jumping from tree to tree, tiptoeing along the grass, slipping through the forest and causing destruction in its wake. Krishna looked around him at the massive flames shooting up almost like columns around them. Checking once more to make absolutely certain that every boy had their eyes closed, Krishna opened his mouth and sucked in a deep, deep breath. The air around them whirled, and soon not only was Krishna sucking in the air, but the smoke as well. He inhaled more forcefully and opened his mouth wider as the flames were drawn toward him. The boys furrowed their brows and flinched behind their closed eyes as they felt the heat of the flames brush closer to their faces. With their eyes closed, they couldn't be sure if the flames were getting closer or if that was simply the effect of being in the midst of the fire for such a long time. But they had firm faith in Krishna, and not one boy dared to peek. In a matter of moments, the entire forest fire was gone. Krishna had swallowed it. Krishna gazed around him with a satisfied smile. The air was filled with smoke, but everyone, both cows and boys, were all safe. Krishna knew that he wouldn't be able to explain any of this to his friends without them questioning him. If they see that this fire has gone missing, maybe they'll be afraid. It would be better to leave this place, Krishna thought to himself. Nodding, he closed his own eyes for no more than a span of a heartbeat. In that instant, he and the other boys found themselves back in the glorious shade of Bandirvan. They were right back where they started. On the far side of the pasture were the hoof prints of the cows that the boys used to track their herd earlier. Their vine swing was still left from before, where they'd left it playing. Everything was just as it had been before they realized that the cows were missing. "You're all safe now. You can open your eyes." Krishna's voice was soft and gentle, and his eyes were filled with love for his friends. All the cowherd boys looked the same. Their eyes were open, looking huge and round on each boy's face, and their mouths all hung open in shock. They laughed in disbelief and in appreciation of their good fortune. They had an inconceivable friend in Krishna. Not only did Krishna save us and our cows from the forest fire, but he brought us right back to Bandirvan. Subala was shaking his head in amazement. Well done, well done! Gopal has done it again! He has protected us and all our cows! The boys cheered and clapped for Krishna, who simply smiled and glanced at each individual boy as he appreciated and acknowledged their praise. They should have been used to this. Krishna saved them all daily. They knew that no matter what happened in their day, they could call on their dearmost friend, and he would always be there to help them. But the boys began to wonder how it was all possible. How was it that Krishna, who didn't seem to be much older than they were, was able to save them, and not just one time, but hundreds of times? How did he know all of these secret tricks? How did he have all of these magic powers? Krishna, sometimes I think that you must be some sort of deva, empowered with gifts from the gods. Maybe that's why you're able to perform all these amazing feats. Bhadrasena was leaning on his walking stick, looking at his friend as though he were afraid if he blinked, Krishna would vanish from the spot. Some of the boys agreed with Bhadrasena. They too were wondering how Krishna got to be so strong. They all remembered the words of the great wise man, the sage Garga Muni, who had told all of Vrindavan that this boy Krishna would always save them from all danger, and that as long as they were with him, no one in their village had anything to fear. It seemed as though only one of the celestial gods could do that. Maybe Krishna was one of those celestial beings, or at the very least he had to have been heavily blessed by them. Just when it seemed as though the day's events and the knowledge that their young friend was more powerful than maybe any of them had ever imagined began to overwhelm them, another boy stepped forward and slapped his arms like a wrestler. He took a wide stance in the grass and looked at Krishna. His eyes narrowed in challenge. Well then, if Krishna is some type of demigod, then we must be demigods too. We are no less brave or strong than Krishna and Balaram, and we are with them every day. If you don't believe me, I challenge you to wrestle with me. I'll show you firsthand just how strong I am. Amongst the sound of laughter, the small boy puffed out his chest and began to circle the area looking for an opponent worthy of him. The sound of the boys' merriment and their play fighting filled the dusty lanes and pastures of Bandirvan, while Krishna and Balaram joined their rowdy company, who no longer thought of them as anything other than their dearest friends, and could only focus on winning the next wrestling match. Shri Krishna Balaram ki jai, Shri Bandirvan ki jai, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. All glories, glories, glories to the playground of God. Bandirvan is a big wrestling place in Vrindavan, and it is known for wrestling pastimes. And this is the love between Krishna and all of his friends. Just as they start thinking, maybe Krishna is special, Krishna thinks, I don't want that. I just want you to know I am your friend. Above all of the awe and reverence and the majesty of the Supreme Person as God, Krishna says, I yearn for you to think of me as your friend. I will save you from everything. Think of me as your friend. Give me your heart. Become so deeply connected with me that nothing can ever change it. As friends, just like the cowherd boys, we will know that God can save us from every single situation, every single circumstance. And then Krishna does what he does. He says, you know what I want though? Krishna wants love. And so he removes that covering where we think, oh, but God is high and mighty. He says, I'm just your friend, aren't I? I'm just your friend who can save you from anything at all times, aren't I? This is our dear friend. One last piece, just one moment. The senses of a person, sight, taste, touch, smell, even up to and including the mind, are likened to the cows present within this beautiful pastime of Krishna swallowing the forest fire. The soul of the living entity is compared to the cowherd boys, who are charged with the task of herding the senses, caring for them, and keeping them safe. It is amazing that even in the midst of the company of Krishna and Balaram, the lords of the heart, that the cows could have been lured anywhere else by the promise of sweeter, greener grass. Within the Bhagavad Gita, our supreme beloved Sri Krishna proclaims to Arjuna, his own friend, that the senses are so strong and impetuous, Arjuna, that they are forcibly carried away by the mind, even of a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. Somehow, our senses, which never seem to be satisfied with anything that we offer them, if we are not careful, can carry us away by force in order for us to attempt to do their bidding. The problem is our senses can hardly ever be appeased by material solutions. Furthermore, Krishna states again in the Gita, as a boat on the water is swept away by a strong wind, even one of the senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. Just as the cows wandered off and fell into grave danger when the boys were preoccupied, even with Krishna and Balaram, the same can be expected from our own senses and mind that we struggle with every day. If we let one of our senses run away and control us, if we let the mind wreak havoc on our lives, it absolutely will. It won't be long before we find ourselves caught in the fires of a soul-deep anguish that we are unable to escape from. How many times has our mind, with the help of our senses, convinced us that we should simply give up, that we aren't good enough for whatever the task is at hand? How many times has our mind and senses hypnotized us into ignoring our true purpose, gifts, and potential? So where does the solution lie? If we cannot trust our senses and even our mind, then who can we trust? Like the cowherd boys who only knew Krishna and Balaram as their life and soul, we find ourselves in those dangerous situations where the fire of doubts and self-manifested lies are spreading around us, choking us with the thick black smoke of despair. We have to follow the example of the simple boys of Braj and call out to our dearmost friend. O Govinda, strength of the strong, there is a raging fire of my own making all around me. The flames of self-doubt, pity, greed, envy, and fear are rising up higher and higher like enormous pillars, obscuring my vision and making me blind to my own potential. Now who can I depend on if not you? I am yours, part of your own family, and a soul forever surrendered to you. Please save me from this fire. Swallow up all the indecision and doubt, and help me escape to the cooling shade of your lotus feet. Please free me from all these misgivings. Save me from myself. I put my faith and trust in you. And just like that, everything can change. Just one moment to turn to our beloved can evaporate the fire of the mind's discontent and carry our hearts back to the pasture of grace. Oh Lord, I depend on you. I give over these problems, these anxieties, the fear, I give it over to you. I know you can save me. Not believe, not think, I know you can save me. Friends, I pray that you all, and I myself included, we all live that knowledge with certainty, that we walk in that knowledge with certainty, that it becomes the overarching truth, the absolute truth of our lives, that our Lord is ever eager, ready, and willing to save us from ourselves, from others, from anything and everything. All we have to do is accept that mercy and grace, take it into our hearts, and cherish it with everything we've got. Thank you so much for being with me, friends. It has been another wonderful day with all of you, and such a beautiful adventure. I really felt like I needed scripture to tell me something today, and it did. Reminded me that Krishna is forever on my side. And just when I think that I am filled with regret and guilt, my friend is so soothing. Oh, friend, why are you regretful? Why do you feel shameful? Why? Why do you feel guilty? God's not looking at us with this revenge in his eyes. He's not looking at us to feel guilty, even when we have done something wrong, even when we've been preoccupied, even when our senses have run away with us. He didn't chastise the cows. He simply called out to them lovingly. He didn't chastise the boys and say, "You're right, you all should have paid more attention. I told you so." No. He said, "Don't worry. I will help you find our cows. They won't be lost. You are not lost. Our friend will come and find you, not with guilt, with compassion, with love. Our friend is looking for you, calling your name. Where is my beloved soul? Come back. Oh Lord, I am yours. I am yours. I am yours. I'll see you next week. Until then, we keep our spirits up. Send me a note. Let me know how you feel. And we'll gather back together next week for another adventure. All glories to all of you spirit souls who come here and make this place divine by your presence, and you lend me your heart for a little while, entrusting it into my care. It is the greatest honor and the greatest privilege that you gift me with every time you come and you say, "Here, I trust you. Hold my heart for a little bit." Thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. All glories to all of our teachers, our guides, our gurus. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Shri Krishna book ki jai. All glories to those spiritual texts that uplift our hearts. And glory, glory to our supreme friend, who is forever all attractive and always with us. Shri Radha Govinda Dev ki jai. I'll see you all next time.